Argentinians take to the streets to support former President Cristina Fernandez as she faces irregularities about her government. Also, Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff now says that her vice president has betrayed her. Thanks so much for joining us. For teleSur's English, I'm Coddy Weddle, and this is from the South. Argentinians, thousands of them, cheered the arrival of former President Cristina Fernandez in Buenos Aires. Fernandez was requested to come to Buenos Aires to testify in a money laundering investigation. Judge Caudillo Bondadio is leading the case after claims that the Fernandez administration had manipulated the price of the dollar for personal benefit. And the current lawmaker and former minister Axel Kicillof refused to respond to the judge's question because no charges have been pressed against him or former government officials. Kicillof said he considered the investigation politically motivated.
The first thing that you can notice is that there is no crime, no wrongdoing, no corruption, and there are no accusations against any former public servant, not in the central bank, not in the executive power, no accusations of corruption.
Meanwhile, the current president, Mauricio Macri, continued to deny that his involvement in the Panama Papers was linked to tax evasion. Now, the president, who is being investigated due to his involvement in offshore societies revealed in the Panama Papers, reiterated on Tuesday that he had not done anything wrong. Macri said he had nothing to hide and that he trusted the country's justice system. The governments of Chile and Argentina have announced that they will build a transnational tunnel which will connect both countries. Now, the project will be built by a joint company with capital from both nations. The tunnel will be 11 kilometers long and will be 2,000 meters high. The ministers of both countries explained during a press conference that the aim is to increase commerce and for Argentina to gain greater access to its Atlantic partners. Political turmoil continues in Brazil as the Speaker of the lower house has announced a new impeachment vote set for Sunday. However, President Dilma Rousseff has accused Vice-President Michel Temer of being a traitor. Temer and Eduardo Cunha, are both from Brazil's Democratic Movement Party, which held an alliance with the Workers' Party.
One of them is the hand, not that invisible, guiding the impeachment process with an unimaginable misuse and abuse of power. The other one is rubbing his hands and rehearsing the fares of a supposed inauguration speech.
Brazil's federal police have arrested former Senator Jim Argüello from the centrist PTB party for taking bribes to protect high-level executives from being summoned by an investigative congressional committee. Now, the arrest is part of the ongoing investigations into the Petrobras corruption scandal, which has become wider as other companies, such as the Odebrecht building company, have been linked to the corruption network. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has announced a new truth commission which will investigate the 2002 coup and the subsequent episodes of political violence here in Venezuela. Now, the president and his cabinet are urging the opposition to join the commission in an effort to achieve justice. The announcement comes after the Supreme Court considered the opposition's amnesty law as unconstitutional. The bill would have pardoned people involved in the 2002 coup against late President Hugo Chavez and also would have freed people charged with non-political crimes such as land speculation. President Maduro urged the opposition to respect the ruling.
The Supreme Court of Justice has made a final ruling, declaring unconstitutional the law that sought forgiveness for the crimes of coups and attempted coups from 1999 to 2015. Justice, peace, peace and justice. Now everyone must obey it.
And for the latest now on the ground here in Venezuela, we turn to our correspondent, Ian Bruce, who joins us from our newsrooms. Ian, how have Venezuelans been receiving this news of the commission?
Well, Cody, there are two very different kinds of reactions because, as you pointed out, there are two very different projects confronting each other here. On the one hand, the Truth and Justice Commission set up by President Maduro today, and on the other hand, the amnesty law, which the opposition-controlled National Assembly passed 2 weeks ago and which was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court last night. You'll remember that last week, victims and relatives of victims of the violence that happened during the opposition protests of 2014 called on President Maduro to send that amnesty law to the Supreme Court and have it ruled unconstitutional, because they say it was just a case of the opposition pardoning themselves and because it covered a far too wide range of offences. But what they wanted instead was precisely this Truth and Justice Commission to examine exactly what happened in each of the cases of violence and to ensure reparations for the victims. So that's one point of view. That's what President Maduro has done. But on the other hand, of course, the opposition and its supporters continue to campaign and hold out for their amnesty law.
And has the opposition made any response to the invitation to join that commission, Ian?
Yes, Cody, they responded by not turning up. President Maduro invited 4 members of the opposition, for them to choose who, to turn up to today's session and to become members of this Truth and Justice Commission. Nobody turned up, so that was their response. I think it's interesting to point out here, Cody, that this division now exists on an international level as well, because this morning we saw the office of the United Nations High Commission for Human Rights coming out saying it lamented very much the decision by the Supreme Court to rule the amnesty law unconstitutional. On the other hand, this afternoon we saw the Secretary General of the South American Regional Bloc, UNASUR, Ernesto Samper, former Colombian president, taking part in the setting up of the Truth and Justice Commission. He said that several other former leaders, the former Prime Minister of Spain, José Luis Zapatero, and 2 presidents, the former president of the Dominican Republic, Leonel Fernandez, and of Panama, Martin Torrijos, would also be taking part, only as observers, he pointed out. They can't take an active part, that's for Venezuelans, but they will accompany the process as observers. So, as I say, this division exists here in Venezuela, but is also playing out on an international level.
Also important to note. All right, Ian Bruce there reporting from our newsrooms here in Caracas. Ian, thank you. We go now to Honduras, to Central America. According to the Freedom of Speech Committee in Honduras, during 2015, 218 alerts of abuses against journalists, and 12 journalists also were assassinated, adding up to 59 murders since the 2009 coup d'etat. With a demonstration in front of the Attorney General offices, they demanded an end to impunity and violence.
Today in Tegucigalpa, 63 paper coffins were set up in front of the Attorney General's office, representing the journalists who have been murdered since 2003 and whose crimes are yet to be investigated.
Since 2003, the Committee for Freedom of Speech, C Libre, has registered 1,291 aggressions against freedom of speech, including 63 assassinations, 4 of them between 2003 and 2009, and 59 after the 2009 coup d'etat. Out of these cases, the Attorney General's office has only investigated 6.
Only 4 people have been sent to jail regarding these assassinations of journalists, but only perpetrators have been convicted and none of the masterminds. Journalists demand an end to impunity.
We have the right to know what has happened to our colleagues, and there is certainty because there is impunity, because there is no investigation, and because current authorities have no interest in profound and objective investigation.
Today, exactly a year ago, the Honduran Congress approved a law on journalist protection. However, 2015 was the most violent year ever, with 12 assassinations of journalists registered. Other than approving laws, authorities have done very little to help communicators work in a safer environment. Gerardo Torres, TeleSur, Tegucigalpa.
The Organization of American States Monitoring Mission has raised concerns that Peru's current system jeopardizes voter participation and democracy. Now, that mission found that Sunday's general elections were threatened by political insecurity for some voters, since some of the candidates were still under investigation and possible disqualification. The OAS mission also criticized the lack of guarantees for both candidates and voters. Peruvian police raided the offices in Lima of the notorious law firm Mossack Fonseca, which the Panama Papers revealed helped the wealthy to evade taxes. Now, the raid comes as Peruvian authorities are investigating several high-profile people linked to the tax evasion scandal. UN Special Envoy to Syria Staffan de Mistura held talks to discuss the crisis in Syria with senior Iranian officials in Tehran. Iran expressed concerns that in the surge of violations of Syria's ceasefire, it could harm planned peace talks this week aimed at ending the 5-year-old civil war. Now, while de Mistura said it was important that the cessation of hostilities continued.
And we agreed that what is very important is that cessation of hostilities continues, that humanitarian aid reaches every Syrian, in particular, of course, those areas besieged, but every Syrian. And 3, that the political process leading to a political transition is now crucially urgent.
More migrants have left a makeshift camp near Idomeni for the Greek government's migrant centers near the border with Macedonia. Some of the refugees said they preferred to move after Macedonian forces security forces fired tear gas at refugees on Sunday who attempted to break through the border fence. According to Belgian authorities, they have charged 2 men over the Brussels attacks and arrested 3 in connection to the Paris attacks. Now, the 2 men who have been charged were involved in renting apartments to the bomber who attacked the Brussels subway on March 22nd. The apartment served as a hideout for the bomber and as well as a suspected accomplice. The arrests over the Paris attacks were made after a raid on a house in a Brussels suburb. No further details were given. Mexicans gathered in front of the German chancellery to protest against the human rights situation in Mexico. The protests coincide with President Enrique Peña Nieto's state visit, where Chancellor Angela Merkel offered support for training soldiers for Mexico and help investigating the disappearance of 43 students in Iguala in 2014. For the first time ever, the 8 candidates vying to be the next Secretary General of the United Nations will pitch for the job in public. Each candidate will make a 10-minute presentation, followed by 2-hour question and answer sessions between Tuesday and Thursday. Now, this process promises greater transparency, but it will ultimately come down to an agreement between the United States and Russia. A bomb explosion in the southern Lebanon city of Sidon killed an official from the Fatah movement. The dead man was identified as Fatih Zaidan, who was responsible for a Palestinian camp located east of Sidon. The camp is home to over 5,000 refugees. The people of Gaza held protests over lengthy power cuts there. More now from our correspondent, Nourhir Razin.
Dozens of citizens gathered in front of the headquarters of the Council of Ministers in Western Gaza City Tuesday morning to protest lengthy power cuts in the Gaza Strip. The cuts are reaching up to 20 hours per day, affecting the region's 1.8 million residents. The angry protesters called on President Mahmoud Abbas to take steps to find a solution to the power crisis in Gaza before it is too late. A spokesman for Gaza's electricity company responded that the blackouts are due to the disconnection of all lines supplying power from Egypt and 2 lines from Israel due to maintenance work 2 weeks ago. Gaza's power station has been operating at just half its capacity since one of its turbines was shut down due to fuel shortage. This crisis has left Gaza residents who have been enduring electricity shortages for years almost entirely without power for 1 week.
The power crisis in the Gaza Strip is political. It aims to punish the people of Gaza for their democratic choice in the 2006 parliamentary elections. Since then, Gaza Strip has been punished in different ways, including the blockade and the power cuts.
Disputes between Gaza's electricity company and the Palestinian Authority's finance ministry in Ramallah over taxes on fuel imports has aggravated the crisis. Hamas says it is unable to collect the bills from citizens who are already suffering unemployment, poverty, and blockade. Meanwhile, the Palestinian Authority criticizes Hamas for failing to pay its bills. Gaza's power crisis will closely move to standstill, with no solution on the horizon as long as Hamas is unable to cover these costs, and the Palestinian Authority firmly holds to the blue tax, which is the tax imposed on Gaza's electricity company. Nuharazin Telesu TV, Gaza.
The number of children used by Boko Haram in West Africa as suicide bombers has risen by more than 10-fold, according to UNICEF. More than 75% of these children are girls. The tactic has proven effective in increasing the number of casualties, as people do not usually see the children as a threat. The International Olympic Committee Coordination Commission is on its final trip to Rio de Janeiro. Now, the visit comes just 4 months before the 2016 Rio Olympics open. The IOC met with local officials and members of the Brazilian organizing committee. The IOC's chair, Nawal, said preparations are advancing, but much work remains. And that's what we're covering on this Tuesday. Thanks so much for joining us. Plenty more on all of those stories and others at our website, telesurtv.net/English. Also, be sure to follow us on social media. We'll see you back here tomorrow.